Hey folks, so I have an interview here today to discuss a huge scandal that's been going on in Canada, and there's been some more news that's come out of this, and it's kind of unclear how this is all going to play out. So I have on the show today Christo Aivalis. He is a postdoctoral fellow in the history department at the University of Toronto, with writing credits in Maclean's, the Globe and Mail, and the Washington Post. And he also hosts his own YouTube channel that I'll link to below this video, so you can check that out. Christo, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So let me just go over quickly what just happened yesterday. So Trudeau has expelled Liberal MPs Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott from the Liberal caucus, and this is. What were your initial thoughts? So I was kind of already expecting this in a way, but at the same time, this is not good for the Liberal Party whatsoever.
No, I mean, if I was a betting man, I would agree. I probably would have said they are going to expel, Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, especially Jody Wilson-Raybould. But I wasn't sure 100%. I didn't know when, for instance. But it did seem to me that this was going to happen, and it's not good for a bunch of reasons. One, it's obviously the scandal continues. It's not dying. This started in early February, and then, it started as a drip, and it's drip, 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 drip. And maybe now the Liberals feel that now they've expelled the people that they feel are at the center of the debate, of the scandal. Maybe this is over, but I don't think it is. It's also a challenge for the Liberal Party because they made such a big deal out of, a gender-balanced and diverse cabinet in 2015, where it says we're not just going to have token representation of women and racialized people and Indigenous people in our caucus. They're going to have meaningful positions of meaningful power. And yet what we've seen, at least from my reading of the situation, is that when those women, and an Indigenous woman in particular, spoke truth to power and said, look, maybe we shouldn't bail out a company that frankly doesn't deserve it, then, she was ultimately removed from her position and then ultimately, forced out of the party. It doesn't look good for the rhetoric of the Liberal Party matching up against the reality of the Liberal Party.
Yeah, so let me just give Trudeau's quote here. So he told the National Caucus yesterday, quote, "The trust that previously existed between these two individuals and our team has been broken, whether it's taping conversations without consent or repeatedly expressing a lack of confidence in our government or me personally as a leader. Our political opponents win when Liberals are divided." So what are your thoughts on Trudeau's, I guess, his reasoning here, his excuse for doing this?
I mean, I don't strictly buy it. His point is that, it's like there's no trust anymore between the various parties, and that's why we had to sever the relationship. But I feel, frankly, that the reason there isn't trust is on a particular matter of policy disagreement rather than like a broader ideological issue. And I think that Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, they wanted to remain Liberals, not because they're part of Team Trudeau, because Trudeau is not the Liberal Party, or at the very least he shouldn't be. Trudeau shouldn't be seen as the Liberal Party. He is the leader of that party. He's obviously an important man in that party, but he is not the Liberal Party. And so it's perfectly reasonable for Wilson-Raybould and Philpott to say, look, we have disagreements with the Prime Minister and people like Gerald Butts and maybe the broader cabinet even, but we have faith in this party and the values. And Jody Wilson-Raybould noted this in her letter that she wrote just before the expulsion came down, which is that, look, some of the things we ran on in 2015, this government hasn't upheld, like electoral reform, she noted. But she says that those are still values she feels that the average Liberal, and that importantly for these people, that the Liberals in their own ridings, because that's who they ultimately represent as people in their riding, that they support. And I think that's a reasonable position. And I think one other thing just to quickly note is that if you remember I know you covered it on your show, the Grassy Knolls protest and how Justin Trudeau had the young woman forced out of the room, and as the rich Liberal donors chortled as she was forced out, Justin Trudeau said, look, what makes the Liberal Party great is we tolerate a wide diversity of views. And yet here we see that's not really the case, right?
Yeah.
A wide diversity of views, but when that diversity of views extends to the fact that, hey, maybe the company that bribed the Gaddafi family and that has made historically illegal donations to the Liberal Party, maybe we shouldn't give them a deferred prosecution agreement. That's outside the Liberal Party's Big Tent, right? So I think it doesn't pass the smell test.
I'm just trying to understand here, what does Trudeau think people are gonna how people are gonna feel about this? Because I don't understand how anybody can possibly think this makes the Liberals look good. That you having somebody speak truth to power within your own party and then you kick them out. I don't. It displays what you're saying, that there is no freedom of thought here. That you have to fall in line. If you're not with the leader, then you don't belong here. There can be no questions at all about my leadership or what the Liberals are doing. Having that sort of leader, I think, it clearly shows you that these Liberal MPs are not free to sort of explore ideas on their own, and they really have to fall in line, and they can't question anything. And if they do, as we've seen, Trudeau is going to hold them accountable. But I don't understand how Trudeau thinks this is going to help him. Like, do you think this is what do you think his calculation is in terms of, like, do you think this actually makes him look good? Or is he aware that he's doing this because I guess he feels challenged and he wants to see the way I think of this? I think it's more of his bruised ego, and he's not really thinking of the larger political landscape, because if he did, I just don't know how this can possibly help them in whatsoever.
This is a man who, and I don't know the finest details of his personal life, but I wrote a book about his father, and
right.
Justin Trudeau has had a relatively barrier-free life.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, he's had a relatively barrier-free path to the office he currently holds. Obviously, he had challenges. He took his party from third to first. He scored a big political victory in 2015. But he's never really had to face significant opposition from within his own movement until now. Until now, where there's two cabinet ministers and very important, influential cabinet ministers standing up to him. And I don't know if he handled this the best. Frankly, I think he made a mistake. I think that there was a path forward for him to keep them in caucus, but out of cabinet, and say, look, the cabinet solidarity is crucial. Canadians would understand that. But this party does accept a wide diversity of views, and they are still Liberals, and we can work through this in the months and years to come.
Yeah.
I think that would have been a path forward. But I feel that maybe his calculation is this story is going to continue to go on and go on and go on, and almost borrowing from Sheila Copps, who has not been the best ambassador for the Liberal brand in the last few weeks. Her argument was like the boil has been lanced, and maybe that's the Liberal strategist view. Like, this is like a festering boil, and you just got to get rid of it. And maybe they're hopeful that, look, a couple factors. One, we are almost in the summer break. Then there's going to be an election. Maybe the Liberals are hopeful that over the summer, Canadians forget about this. Maybe the Liberals, and I've talked about this, I'm sure you have. I know I'm an NDP supporter. You as a Green supporter are probably even more, or as a former Green candidate, are more, cognizant of this, that, first past the post is like the Liberals' only kind of refuge. And I think, frankly, that's one of their hopes, is that, look, they could do what they want because they feel they have the 70% of the electorate that, isn't a diehard conservative. They have a good chunk of those people in varying degrees held hostage. And so it's like, well, Greens, NDPers, other independents, they're not gonna do anything about it. We have them, lock, stock, and barrel. They'll grumble about this, they'll tweet about it, all this, but they'll vote for us. And I think that's part of their calculation. So it's distance. It's perhaps this view. I think another factor, to be fair to Trudeau potentially, is it did seem like a lot of backbench Liberal MPs were not happy with Wilson-Raybould and Philpott. A lot of the media coming out, it was very self-interested. It was like, we're going to lose our seats over this, right? So it wasn't about 9,000 jobs. It was about 179 Liberal MP jobs, right? But the reality is that there's a lot of backbenchers and close ridings that feel that this scandal is going to make the difference between them winning and losing. And I think some of them wanted vengeance. Now, I don't know. Again, I agree with you. I don't think it was the right move.
No.
But I'm like, if I'm trying to look into it, I think it's, one, we got progressives hostage. What are they going to do, right? I don't agree with that, obviously, but that's what the Liberals think. That's what a lot of their supporters on Twitter think. Two, distance it. Like, look, we got months until the election. Summer's going to happen. People are going to forget. Whatever, right? It's all about jobs and things like that. And then three, it's the, Trudeau's got varying forms of pressure within his party, and I think that he chose to go with the side that wanted Wilson-Raybould and Philpott gone.
Yeah, but listen to the thing though. I think it's already starting to work against them. So I have a quote here from the Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, president of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. He said about Trudeau here, quote, "He's toast, absolutely toast. Once again, Mr. Trudeau has demonstrated his arrogance and did absolutely the worst thing he could possibly do. There's going to be an enormous backlash across the country in terms of Indigenous people." So if this is true, and there now becomes more vocalized opposition, vocalized progressive opposition towards Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. I mean, I see the potential there for. I mean, first past the post potentially can't even save the Liberal Party at this point. So, do you foresee these sorts of leaders coming out, more progressive leaders coming out and saying, "Hey, we just can't be with this party anymore"?
Yeah, I would say so. And there's a couple key factors here. One, Indigenous people are an important bloc in Canada. Um, they are a relatively small part of the population, due to genocide and all of
Yeah.
the realities of our history. But they are a significant part, and they play a significant role in a lot of ridings. And specifically, Wilson-Raybould being a BC MP and still being fairly popular out in BC, I
Mm-hmm.
think is going to hurt Trudeau because BC is really like a true battleground province, a ton of seats. And depending on the region, the NDP, Liberals, Conservatives, and now even Greens are all in play for multiple seats in that province.
Yeah.
And the reality now is that Trudeau popularity tanking in BC could really hurt him because the reality is Trudeau, his path to a majority is going to be harder this time. Maybe he's banking on some pickups in Quebec. Indications are that he might gain some, but less than he'd hoped. He's
Mm-hmm.
going to lose some seats in the Maritimes. He's suffering right now in the Maritimes. Grenier has noted, from the CBC, has noted that the Maritimes is where the Liberals have taken the biggest hit, actually, so far in this scandal. There's only 32 seats out there, but the Liberals have all 32. So they
Mm-hmm.
can only lose. So if you
Yeah.
think, like, where are they going to gain seats? It was like, okay, maybe Quebec and maybe BC. And BC, it looks off the table right now for gains and might even be some losses. And I think you're right. You're going to see some movement away from Trudeau from progressives. They might not all move to a different party, but
Mm-hmm.
even if they disengage, that'll hurt Trudeau. Even if
Yeah.
they start,
Exactly.
just
Just stay
being
home.
quiet, or
Yeah.
yeah, staying home, being quiet, that'll hurt him. Another factor is, as you noted, is that A word. Every party has like a weakness in people's minds. Whether it's the Conservatives and being hateful, or whether it's the NDP and being sort of idealistic or impractical. But the one that affects the Liberals above all is arrogance. That's
Mm-hmm.
something that the Liberal Party always ends up losing for, real or perceived. It's
Yeah.
what took down the Martin Chrétien years. It's what took down Pierre Trudeau. It's what took down Kathleen Wynne here in Ontario. The reality is that when the Liberals are seen as arrogant, they lose. And
Yeah.
Justin Trudeau, again, part of this is the way he talks. Conservatives find him arrogant. That whether fair or not, he has a certain presentation that is sort of hoity-toity, I feel, in a lot of people. He's
Yeah.
already starting at a disadvantage there. But when you add in this, when you add the thank you for your donation remark, when you add the fact that it just happens to be, if you listen to Liberal supporters, that 3 women have gone down over this, 2 of
Mm-hmm.
them non-white. It just happens to be, quote unquote. All of this reeks of arrogance. The SNC, it's not just SNC. It's a company that Justin Trudeau feels his personal electoral fortunes tied to. It's a company, again, with historical ties, in some cases illegal ties to the Liberal Party. And it's this general perception that the Liberal Party has, in some ways, even more fundamental ties to like the corporate elite in Canada than the Conservatives even. And all of this ties into an arrogance that will hurt Trudeau. Now, again, like first past the post, it could be his savior, but it could be the razor that takes him out because again, it's a cruel system. It's a cruel system where losing 6-7% of the vote could cost you half your seats,
Mm-hmm.
depending on where it is. And I wonder if Liberal supporters right now are wondering if it would have been best to keep that promise that they made 1,800 times. Right
Yeah.
about now, I think it would have been a good time for it.
Yeah, and I think people are just they're wising up to Trudeau and his phoniness. I mean, a lot of the reason that I think he won big in the election was because of Harper and the Conservatives, and people were just tired of the Conservative years, and they wanted a big change. So they sort of, I think people largely overlooked a lot of Trudeau's faults and a lot of his fake feminism, a lot of his fakeness in general, and voted for a party that at the time was trying to push a progressive message. In some ways, trying to push a more progressive message than the NDP at the time. Now, on paper, I don't think that that's actually the case, but in terms of his ability to sell that to people, I think that's what really led to that big Trudeau majority. But this time around, people are seeing through it, and on top of the phoniness and the fake feminism, they're also now seeing the Liberals clearly tied to corporate elitism, and having a combination of all these different factors now being obvious and upfront. I just think it's going to do what you said. It's going to have people both leave to different parties, but also have people just stay home and just be disengaged from the actual process, which I think will largely hurt the Liberals the most. So from this point, where do you see, how do you see the NDP and potentially the Greens trying to capitalize on the potential failure here of the Liberals?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I'm of the mind that you are, that the Liberals didn't really run to the left of the NDP in 2015, but they were able to sell a message that the average voter saw as in the same realm as the NDP, and they were successful at that. We could go through that platform and explore the differences, and the liberal middle class tax cut didn't help the middle class. That's another story for another day. But the reality is you're right. They won on a progressive message. They certainly won their majority on a progressive message. Those last few seats that they got that gave them their majority were on things like electoral reform. We're on things like no more fossil fuel subsidies. We're on things like gender equality and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And I think you're right that a lot of people are seeing now, a lot of younger people, and a lot of people with short political memories, are seeing that this is the same political party that put Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin into power.
Yeah.
The same party that, at the end of the day, represents the 1% and the 0.1%. And that's never gone away. And again, this is where the rhetoric of Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party, which is different, is crashing up against the historical realities of the Liberal Party, which are the same, which are basically the same. And there are times where that can work together. There are times when diversity can be folded into the traditional Liberal mantra, like it is within corporate America and corporate Canada.
Yeah.
There are times where that synergy is possible. But there are times like when an Indigenous woman says, look, the rule of law has been perverted so much in our country, and it's affected me and my people more than all. So I am especially sensitive to the need for the rule of law being applied fairly and equitably. And Jody Wilson-Raybould went down over that. And that was a fundamental worldview difference between an Indigenous woman who has experiences with law and order being abused and a predominantly white male leadership of the Liberal Party who has always seen law and order as a tool in their favor. And I think you're right as well, noting that the Liberal Party's connections to corporate elites here is very clear. And I think it's important to remind people that, the Liberals have talked about this 9,000 jobs thing, but it's really not about that. Because, and you've talked about it, I've talked about it, lots of people have talked about it, Trudeau isn't doing anything for the workers in Oshawa.
Yep. Exactly.
And Trudeau and the Conservatives, to be fair, this is a kind of a dual united policy. Both of them went after postal workers on their things like the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, those workers' rights. And it should be remembered that, the Liberal Party has opposed Scott Duvall. He's an MP from Hamilton, an NDP MP from Hamilton. He's put a motion forward to, during bankruptcy proceedings, protect workers' benefits and pensions before investor, golden parachutes and CEO golden parachutes. And the Liberals and Conservatives have resisted him. In fact, there was a Liberal MP when he was approached by this who said, fuck the steelworkers and fuck Stelco pensioners. And those are his words. That's the Liberal Party. It's not about jobs. It's about the SNC-Lavalin company. It's not about the 9,000 workers. Because if it was about workers, we would see this government, defending workers in other jurisdictions, maybe where their political fate isn't as closely tied to SNC. Yeah. We might also see them talk about creating a crown corporation. If SNC is so corrupt that they need to be punished, but the work still needs to be done, why not just take these government contracts, because that's largely what SNC runs on, is government contracts, and just do it through a crown corporation. 9,000 jobs saved, a corrupt company goes down the drain. best of both worlds. Because again, it's not really about that. It's about
Mhm.
SNC being protected because it's a liberal company and it's part of the liberal brand.
Yeah, and part of my fear is that's not really being discussed as much in the mainstream press as it should be. Because the fear I have is that the conservatives are going to benefit from this liberal scandal, and they shouldn't be benefiting. I mean, this again, as you said, the liberals and the conservatives are on the same page on this. And look, I saw a tweet from News Talk where I used to have a radio show saying that so they had Andrew Scheer on, and they were going to ask him if he would be open to Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott joining the conservatives. And here I'm thinking like, what? Why would they do that? Like, what are you talking about? Like, Jody Wilson-Raybould, the situation that happened to her would never have happened in the Conservative Party because the opportunity would have never been there. I mean, the Justice Minister, if it was a Conservative Justice Minister, they would have went for the deferred prosecution agreement without question. So this idea that these are open to conservative ideas now, no, these people. I mean, the media really has to understand here and communicate that the conservatives and the liberals historically are on the same page when it comes to corporate power, and that really only the NDP and the Greens are challenging that and wanting to change that. So, I mean, what do you see next for Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott and even MP Selina Cesar-Chavannes? Do you see them potentially joining the NDP, maybe staying as independents, maybe just leaving altogether? I think Selina said she isn't coming back. I'm not exactly sure about that. But what do you see is next for these MPs?
Well, Selina Cesar-Chavannes, basically her process was, she was left the Liberal caucus last week before, but before that she had already announced that she wasn't running again, that she was going to leave. That was seen as some people thought it was related to SNC. I think it at least is in part. Part of it could be related to the fact that that's a usually pretty solid blue riding that flipped in 2015. Okay. Maybe there's a sense that riding's going back to the Tories anyway, because the Liberals could win a majority and still lose that riding type thing, right? It really is a difficult one for them to win again. Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, they seem committed to fighting this. In their messages last night after the expulsion, it wasn't like, well, I was booted from the party and therefore I'm leaving politics. It seems like they're making a move to consolidate support in their ridings. And I don't know what their ultimate futures are. I would say it would be unlikely to see them join the Tories. Although, this has been crazy politics. I mean, I don't want to say
I'd
nothing
be shocked,
possible.
but I guess
would be
it can happen.
But I mean, one challenge with the NDP is that the NDP at federal level, at least, is generally reluctant to take floor crossers. Now, they're not floor crossers, right? That's the thing. Are they really floor crossers if they've been expelled from a party for speaking truth to power? Maybe Jagmeet Singh has a different perspective. He also is a new leader with a new mandate. I don't think that rule is, to my knowledge, I don't think that rule is codified, that it's a rule. So you might see them move to the NDP. That's a possibility. Jody Wilson-Raybould perhaps even more so, because her riding is in BC, where the NDP is stronger. Philpott is not as much in a kind of traditional NDP eligible riding. So there are difficulties there. But I don't know. I think it's possible, frankly, that these women could win as independents. I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility. Now, there's a few caveats there. One, how actually strong is their support in the riding? Like, do the riding executives, do the rank and file bases of those ridings support them? And two, it's like in those ridings at least, can they win over, conservative and NDP support, right? Can they win, go to those voters in those ridings and say, look, I know you're not liberals. I'm not anymore either. But you need me in Ottawa to keep Justin Trudeau honest. I've proven I can do that. So you need to elect me as an independent, and I will support on an issue-by-issue basis the best party positions. And I think that they could make a credible case. I really do. So, I mean, I would say, it's always hard for an independent to win. I don't think I can't remember the last time an independent has won a seat in the federal House of Commons and not just, for instance, become an independent because they've left a party. I can't remember the last time an independent has won a seat. So I would say it's unlikely, but I would say that this is a special case. So you might see it happen.
Yeah, this is a case of where they're going to have more name recognition than other candidates potentially would as independents, because they've been in the news, because they stood up to the party. So I think you're right. I think that there is a if anybody can win as an independent, I think it's these two MPs. But
Yeah.
I think that's about it. Is there anything else I missed here that you want to mention about this story?
No, I mean, I think it's just it's a really important one. I think it's important because we're really talking not just about like this particular case, but it's like what does the Liberal Party represent itself as? How is it going to go into the next election? What is the role of women and of Indigenous people and of non-white people in the Liberal Party? Like these are questions that Canadians are going to have, and
Hmm.
progressives especially. Like as people that travel in our circles, some of whom are liberals, most of whom are Greens and NDPers, but some of whom, hold their noses and vote Liberal. What are they going to think about all of this? And I think that's something that we haven't really reckoned with yet. And I'm excited to have these conversations. Justin Trudeau thought, in Sheila Copp's language, that the lance has been boiled and this story's over. But now I think that he's made a mistake, and now Wilson-Raybould and Philpott, now they're, I think, truly liberated to say what they want to say, at least
Yeah,
politically, if not
that's
legally.
right.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Christo, for joining me. Check out his YouTube page. I'll link to it below the video. You have what are your most recent videos right now on the channel?
I just made one last night actually talking about this. I've also made one recently about talking about Bernie Sanders, why millennials have this connection with him. I make the case that, whereas boomers and Gen X politicians kind of own, like, were enmeshed in this neoliberal consensus when their formative years, Bernie knows a world before neoliberalism, and people
Hmm.
of our generation, we sort of only know neoliberalism, like from
Yeah,
a life perspective. So it's like Bernie is giving this vision of politics that before him, at least in the U.S.,
yeah,
no one was talking about, right? So
yeah.
that's why he's so special, millennial. So I think people would agree with that. I know you have a lot of supporters that follow U.S. politics, and I think they'd like that video.
Awesome. All right, check it out below. Christo, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.